known as Palestine, people of Palestine, and their Palestinian people. But the roots of this new territorial national consciousness are found in the late 19th century. Today the society operates publicly and runs various social and educational projects in Palestine and the Near East under the Arabic rendition of the name cited by Baders in his 1898 preface. In June and July 2012, to mark the 130th anniversary of the Society's foundation and start of its operation in 1882 in Palestine, the Society opened the Russian Center for Science and Culture in Bethlehem and staged various celebrations in Moscow sponsored by the Russian government. 2 years later, on the 3rd of September 2014, a Galilee branch of the Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestinian Society was officially launched at the Arab Orthodox Center in Nazareth, which, despite the change in the circumstances of Nazareth, kept the 132-year-old Palestinian name intact. Speakers at this official Nazareth ceremony included Russian official representatives and Hanar Arbu. Hanar, of Haifa, author of a recent work in Arabic on the beginnings of the Palestinian Renaissance, who lectured on the seminal cultural activities of the society in late Ottoman Palestine. It is also worth noting that a significant number of Palestinians educated in Al-Maskab schools in late Ottoman Palestine later joined Palestinian national parties during the British Mandatory period. Some also joined the Palestine Communist Party, PCP, during the same period. Being Palestine, becoming Palestine, in Mahmoud Darwish's poetry. I was born close to the sea to a Palestinian mother and an Aramaic father, to a Palestinian mother and a Moabite father, to a Palestinian mother, an Arab father. Darwish 1994-69. Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish 1941-2008 was inspired by the incredibly rich social and cultural memories of historic Palestine. His poetry gave a deep sense of such questions of Palestinian identity and its continued formation and transformation. While many modern Arab nationalists strive for uniqueness and exclusivity and continuously search for purity and clarity in constructing their nationalist identities, Darwish, by contrast, searched for the subtle, mixed and subdued forms of identity represented by an appreciation of the shadowy and inclusive heritage of Palestine. This subtle and rich heritage was woven into the fabric of modern Palestinian national identity and the way this identity was particularly framed by Darwish. The latter was brought up an internal refugee in the Galilee after his village, Al-Burwer, was destroyed by Israel in 1948. He later lived much of his adult life in exile. Like many modern Palestinian intellectuals, Darwish did not emerge from the urban metropolitan elite or aristocratic families of the country, but came from the countryside and the periphery of Palestine, Galilee. However, Darwish became the embodiment of multi-tiered Palestinian national identity and the most celebrated producer of linguistic and cultural memory in modern Palestine. For Darwish, the multi-layered conception of Palestinian identity is evident by the fact that it is the product of all the powerful cultures that have passed through the land of Palestine: the Hellenistic, the Persian, the Roman, the Byzantine, the Aramaic, the Arab, the Jewish, the Muslim, the Arab-Jewish, the Ottoman, the British. However, the oral history and visual and material heritage of Palestine and their natural settings have also figured hugely in Darwish's national poetry. For Darwish, modern representations of Palestinian Arab identity were deeply rooted in the history, geography and natural boundaries of the country, the toponymy and Arabic language and cultures of Palestine, and its evolution within the wider Arab environs. According to a key historian of modern nationalism, Benedict Anderson, 1991, European vernacular languages, replacing Latin, and the mass circulation of images by the press and in print capitalism played important roles in the way their modern nation, as an imagined community, has been constructed and spread in Europe. In the case of modern Palestine, the introduction of print capitalism in the late 19th century, the spread modern education, linguistic, cultural and religious memories, standard Arabic and vernacular, colloquial, Palestinian Arabic all became markers of a distinct identity. Perhaps it is not surprising that the most influential Palestinian national newspaper of the modern era was called Palestine, 1911 to 1967, not Palestine, emphasizing the local colloquial Arabic name for the country, Palestine, as a way of forging a distinct or separate Palestinian national identity. In addition to the vernacularization of a nascent national identity, the experience of distinct geography, living history and cultural, linguistic and religious memories of modern Palestine were central to the construction of modern Palestinian national identity. The Palestinian vernacular was certainly important in the visualization of modern Palestine. In 1909, a manual of Palestinian Arabic for self-instruction was published by H. Spoer, Fellow of the American School of Archaeology and Oriental Research in Jerusalem, and E. Nasrallah Haddad, teacher of Arabic at the Teacher Training Seminary at the Syracuse Waisenhaus in Jerusalem, 17, also known as the Schneller Orphanage. This incipient local nationalism was coupled with vernacularization and interest in local Palestinian folklore, and this was particularly evident in the pioneering work of Tawfik Karnan, 1882–1964, a physician, ethnographer, anthropologist, prolific author and Palestinian nationalist. Born in Beit Jailer, Karnan served as a medical officer in the Ottoman army during the First World War and would later serve as the first president of the Palestine Arab Medical Association, founded in 1944. Of course, by the 19th century, Palestine had been for many centuries under Islam an Arab land and an Arab country, Ballard, with Arabic, vernacular and standard being a key marker of its cultural identity. Under the impact of modernization, vernacularization and cultural awakening in late Ottoman Palestine during the second half of the 19th century, literary Arabic also went through updating and simplification in the curricula of some schools. In 1909, Palestinian educator Khalil Sarkakini, 1878–1953, founded the Dusturier School in Jerusalem and pioneered a modern progressive education system which not only made the primary language of instruction Arabic instead of Turkish, but also introduced new methods of teaching Arabic by updating Arabic grammar and simplifying its basic general rules. Tamari, 2003. Later, this progressive tradition of simplifying, updating and bringing literary Arabic closer to vernacular Palestinian Arabic continued in the national poetry of Mahmoud Darwish, echoing the Heideggerian notion of their becoming of being, self-representation and their becoming of being Palestinian, according to Darwish, are related in some sense to the way modern Palestinian identity was progressively being uncovered, experienced, visualized and reconfigured. Point 18 for Darwish, the Arabic language and poetry and collective and social memories of Palestine, in particular, were fundamental to the uncovering and construction of local Palestinian identity. The meters of the rhythmical Arabic poetry are known in Arabic as Assis, Buher. Darwish's highly evocative poetry also visualized modern Palestine as a space between the Mediterranean Sea and the Arabian Desert, an idea which is deeply rooted in the medieval Arab Islamic conception and social memories of Palestine. But for Darwish, the hinterland of Palestine, Bar Falastin, and the Sea of Palestine, Bar Falastin, symbolized literally and metaphorically by the Mediterranean Sea and the Arabian Desert, represent Palestine as a whole. They are also spaces of experiences, of inner consciousness and subconsciousness, and of consciously unveiled personal and collective identities. Vernacularization, indigeneity, and modern representations of Palestine in the Palestinian Arab press, the newspaper Falastin, 1911–1967. It is widely recognized that the geopolitical conception of Palestine evolved significantly from the experiences of late Ottoman Palestine to those of the British Mandatory period, or from the notion of their sea to the desert to the modern boundaries of their sea to the river. In addition, resistance to Zionist immigration and settler projects from the late Ottoman period onwards played a large part in the national conceptualization of modern Palestine. Palestinian national opposition to Zionism began to crystallize around Zionist settler activities in Palestine in the years before the First World War. It is widely recognized that education, print capitalism and the modern press played a major role in the formation of modern national identities. Anderson, 1991. This was also true in the case of the growth of Palestinian education and the emergence of the Palestinian press in late Ottoman urban Palestine. Baker, 2016b. In January 1911, Palestinian Arab Orthodox journalists Isser and his cousin Youssef Issa set up in Jaffa, in the Mutasarrifiyya of Jerusalem of late Ottoman Palestine, the daily newspaper Palestine. Why would one of the earliest modern Arabic national newspapers in Palestine be called Palestine, the colloquial, used daily name for the country, not the standard or literary medieval Arabic names for the country, Palestine or Philistin? Why vernacularize and use the vernacular Arabic form for Palestine for a leading nationalist newspaper, Palestine, rather than using Palestine or Philistin, the traditional standard Arabic names for the country names, which go all the way back to early Islam? Not only were these literary Arabic forms, Palestine or Philistin, remembered in the 19th century, in fact they were used in Palestinian and Arab writings and were synonymous with an administrative geographic unit, Abd al-Hadi 1923-32. Moreover, the standard form of Palestine was used by Khairuddin al-Ramli in the 17th century, the Islamic Sharia court of Jerusalem in the 18th century, and Khalil-Baydas in the 1890s. In the absence of an explanation by the founding editors themselves, the answer to the adoption of the vernacular form of Palestine is likely to be multifaceted and contextual. In modern times, vernacularization, nationness, and the need to establish a distinctive national identity can be seen again and again in early modern Europe, in modern Russia, Turkey, Japan, and a whole range of countries across Asia. Vernacularization was seen in late Ottoman Palestine as key to a distinct, and even separate, national identity marker. See naming a national newspaper from below. The editors adopted the form Palestine as the common, most widely spoken and most popularly used term by local Palestinians and on the streets of Palestine, as opposed to Palestine, which was largely confined to the writings in Arabic of the educated and cultural elites of the country. Clearly, the editors and journalists of Palestine were intent on popularizing Palestinian nationalism from below and among ordinary people and not just confining it to educated local elites. Palestine was also founded in Jaffa, away from the prying eyes of the Ottoman authorities in Jerusalem, of which early Palestinian nationalists were deeply suspicious. Both Jaffa and Haifa, which were closely linked to the Ottoman Hejaz Railway and the rising Palestinian middle classes, and began to eclipse their historically powerful port city of Acre from the late 19th century onwards, emerged as major economic and cultural centers in late Ottoman Palestine, competing with the traditionally most powerful cultural center in the country, Al-Quds al-Sharif, Jerusalem. This three-way competition and the dynamic cultural awakening of late Ottoman Palestine would ultimately ensure the emergence of an amazingly rich and culturally diverse but fairly unified predominantly Arab country by the First World War. In Haifa in December 1908, 3 years before the founding of Palestine in Jaffa, Palestinian journalist Najib Nasser, 1865-1947, who had worked as a pharmacist for the Scottish Hospital in Tiberias, Galilee, founded and edited Al-Carmel, named for Mount Carmel in the Haifa district, the first Palestinian anti-colonial weekly newspaper in Arabic, Baker 2011.19. These early Palestinian newspapers of the coastal cities of Jaffa and Haifa played an important role in the visualization and textual reconstruction of modern Palestinian identity in the late Ottoman period, Baker 2011-2016b. However, it should always be kept in mind that in the conception of modern Palestinian Arab identity, the growth of Palestinian nationalism and the growing sense of local Palestinian territorial patriotism were always intertwined with deep-rooted identification with the surrounding Arab political and cultural environment. Bracy 2005-2011.20. As we have already shown, indigenous social memory, memory of memories of historic Palestine, was preserved in the writings of Muslim authors such as Khairuddin al-Ramli, 1585-1671, and in the archives of the Islamic Sharia court of Jerusalem in the 18th century, Rood 2004, as well as in the local form of the name, Palestine. Furthermore, based on indigenous social memory and Palestinian colloquialism, the choice of the vernacular Palestinian name Palestine for the Jaffa newspaper by the two Palestinian Arab Greek Orthodox journalists, the Al-Isrs, reproduced the medieval Arab Muslim designation for the country, Palestine and Falastin. In an extraordinary leading article, Youssef Hanar Isser echoes local social memories of historic Palestine. The combative anti-Zionist newspaper Palestine, 1911 to 1967, contributed significantly to the forging of a new, distinct and separate Palestinian identity. Tamari 2014. Palestine's editorial policy was also progressive, as it defended the Palestinian failure on the land question and fought against religious fanaticism, sectarianism and ignorance. Tamari 2014. Bakatamari 2014-2016 B3. The cultural geography of the editors of Palestine espoused secular Ottoman citizenship and equality combined with local Palestinian patriotism. They also promoted autonomous cultural linguistic nationalism, which embraced the Arab religious and cultural heritage of Islam. As for the political geography of Palestine, Issa wrote in January 1912 that the boundaries of his homeland, Watan, extends from the borders of Egypt to the Balkar 21 and from the mountains of Moab on the eastern shores of the Dead Sea to the Mediterranean. Point 22. Contrast this late Ottoman Palestinian nationalist perception of Palestine, which clearly draws inspiration from the memories of historic Palestine, including Greater Palestina under the Byzantines and the Arab province of Jund Falastin, with post-First World War Palestinian nationalist representations of the country which have since then stuck symbolically to the boundaries of British Mandatory Palestine, 1917-1948. It is not entirely clear whether Orthodox Yusuf Isser's geopolitical representations of historic Palestine in 1912 was based on Palestinian Arab Orthodox Christian social and cultural memories which were linked to the independent All-Palestine Orthodox Church of Jerusalem, whose ecclesiastical jurisdiction had been widely recognized and exercised over Greater Palestine. There are three Palestines. 4th-7th centuries AD, since the mid-5th century AD. This ecclesiastical jurisdiction, which would have been known to all educated Orthodox Palestine Christians in the early 20th century, has continued until today, and it includes the whole of present-day Palestine, Israel and Jordan. In this ecclesiastical context, the remarkable discovery of the Byzantine Madar floor mosaic map in 1884, discussed in Chapter 4, covering the area between Egypt to Lebanon and between the Mediterranean Sea and Eastern Arabia Desert, and with the name Palestina in its Greek inscriptions, and the growing involvement of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in Jerusalem in the study of, and local and international publicity surrounding the discovery of, the map in the period between the early 1890s and 1906, 23 may be of some relevance to the way Yusuf Issa described the boundaries of Palestine in 1912. As for the Madar map itself, the first known representation of the map was, in fact, created at the Franciscan Printing Press in Jerusalem in 1897, with assistance from the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in Jerusalem. Moreover, since the late 19th century, the Palestine Arab Orthodox community had been involved in a struggle over the Arabization of the Palestine Orthodox Church and the promotion of Arab bishops and senior hierarchs in the Greek-dominated Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. In fact, for decades under the editorship of the Issa cousins, Palestine would remain dedicated not only to Palestinian territorial nationalism within Pan-Arab solidarity, but also to the Palestine Arab Orthodox community in its struggle with the Greek-dominated Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. Therefore, the ecclesiastical Orthodox memories of Greater Palestine under the Byzantines cannot be ruled out, since it has survived in the rhetoric of the Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem until today. In any event, one thing is clear: historically, and according to Palestine Muslim geographers and writers, the Balkar region mentioned by Issa, which is located northwest of Amman, present-day Jordan's capital, was not part of the province of Jund Falastin of the Middle Ages. In fact, Balkar was originally and historically part of, and throughout most of the Umayyad period subordinated to, the Islamic province Jund Damashq, the Damascus province, a massive province which incorporated other territories east of the River Jordan. Lestrange 2010, 43-48, Blankenship 1994, 47-48, 292. Note 7. In any case, the newspaper Palestine became the most widely circulated and, consequently, most influential Arabic daily in Palestine during the British Mandate, powerfully shaping the discourse of the Palestine nationalist political movement as it struggled to resist two foreign forces, British Imperialism and Zionist Settler Colonization, Calif 2011, Jeffrey Calif 2011-2015. 173. While its discourse after 1918 focused on the geography of mandatory Palestine. From its beginnings in late Ottoman Palestine, Palestine also was the Arab country's fiercest and most consistent critic of European Zionist settler projects. The term Palestine in Ruhi al-Khalidi's unpublished manuscript. Another early Palestinian opponent of Zionism was Ruhi Bey al-Khalidi, 1864–1913, a brilliant writer, liberal thinker, lecturer in Islamic studies at the Sorbonne University, diplomat and talented politician at the turn of the 20th century. Kazmi 1992, Khalidi, W. 1984-74, Baker 2016 c. Al-Khalidi also served as Consul General of the Ottoman State in Bordeaux, France, from 1898 to 1908. While at the same time publishing articles in Al-Hilal and Al-Manar in Cairo under the pen name Al-Maqdisi, the Jerusalemite, Baker 2016 c. 181. In 1900, Al-Khalidi was a co-founder of the family Islamic Waqf Library, Al-Khalidiyya Library, in the Old City of Jerusalem. It is one of the largest and most important Muslim family libraries in the world and a living landmark to Palestine and the Palestinian people. Ruhi al-Khalidi was a nephew of the mayor of Jerusalem, Yusuf Diyar al-Din Pasha al-Khalidi, and in 1908 he was one of 3 delegates elected to represent Jerusalem in the new Ottoman government, later becoming the deputy to the head of the Ottoman Parliament. In 1911, al-Khalidi was a close friend of Khalil al-Sarkakini, a Jerusalemite progressive pedagogue and one of the most influential Palestinian educationalists and literary thinkers of the modern era. Al-Khalidi's work was an example of the emergence of a distinct Palestinian territorial national identity among the educated urban elites in the country at the turn of the 20th century. Commenting on his Arab country of Palestine shortly before his untimely death in 1913, Ruhi al-Khalidi had this to say: "It is noteworthy that whenever the name of the country appears, it is always Palestine, never southern Syria or anything else." Ruhi al-Khaldi's unpublished manuscript, Zionism or the Zionist Question, Al-Khalidiyya Library, Jerusalem, cited in Gerber 1998a. Point 24. Today, Al-Khalidiyya Library houses a large collection of Islamic historical and fiqh manuscripts, a local collection built by Palestinians, and a unique Arabic manuscript about the history of political Zionism written by Ruhi al-Khalidi in the late Ottoman period. Al-Khalidi's undated manuscript, in his beautiful handwritten Arabic, was composed many months, perhaps several years, before his death in 1913. I had the chance of examining the text at the Khalidiyya Library on the 22nd of April 2017. The extraordinary manuscript looks like an unfinished draft book which Ruhi al-Khalidi appeared to have been working on long before his death. Crucially, throughout the text repeatedly he uses the terms Palestine and Turab Palestine, soul of Palestine, to describe Zionist ambitions and settle colonization in his own country of Palestine. The manuscript also contains a list of Zionist colonies in Palestine, with their Hebrew names and with the local Palestinian Arabic names they had either replaced or were named after. Interestingly, there is no mention in the manuscript of Suriyya al-Janubiyya, southern Syria, as an alternative way of describing Ottoman Palestine. Instead, Ruhi al-Khalidi mentions Roman Palestine and refers to Palestine under the Ottomans. The manuscript was clearly intended for publication, and overall it gives the impression that the Arabic term Palestine had been used by Ruhi al-Khalidi and his compatriot for decades. Muslims coexisted with Christian Arabs and Arab Jews in Muslim-majority Palestine for centuries, and Ruhi al-Khalidi was naturally sympathetic to the idea of Jewish religious attachment to Jerusalem. But he was highly critical of Zionism as a political project and saw Western Zionist colonization schemes as a major threat to the indigenous people of Palestine. In an interview with the Hebrew periodical Haaretzvi on 1 November 1909, al-Khalidi, then a member of the Ottoman Parliament, expressed concern that Zionist settler colonization would inevitably lead to the expulsion of Arabs from the places they had inhabited for centuries. Baker 2016 c. 183. Like Ruhi al-Khalidi, former mayor of Jerusalem Yusuf Diyar al-Din al-Khalidi, 1829–1907, had strongly objected to the Zionist project in Palestine. Representing Jerusalem in the Ottoman Parliament in the 1870s, Al-Khalidi had earlier attended an English school in Malta where he studied English and French, and then continued to study Semitic languages in the Oriental Academy of Vienna. In a well-known letter to Zadok Khan, the chief rabbi of France and an associate of Theodore Herzl, in early 1899, Al-Khalidi suggested that the Zionists should find another place for the implementation of their political project. In theory, Zionism is an absolutely natural and just idea on how to solve the Jewish question. Yet it is impossible to overlook the actual reality, which must be taken into account. Palestine is an integral part of the Ottoman Empire, and today it is inhabited by non-Jews. This country is held in esteem by more than 390 million Christians and 300 million Muslims. By what right do the Jews want it for themselves? Jewish money will not be able to buy Palestine. The only way to take it is by force using cannons and warships. Turks and Arabs in general sympathize with Jews, but some of them were affected by the fever of hatred for Jews, as it happened to the most advanced of their European, civilized nations. Also the Christian Arabs, especially the Catholic and Orthodox, hate Jews very much. Even if Herzl obtained the approval of the Sultan Abdülhamid II for the Zionist plan, he should not think that a day will come when Zionists will become masters of this country. It is therefore necessary, to ensure the safety of the Jews in their Ottoman Empire, that the Zionist movement, in the geographic sense of the word, stops. Good Lord, the world is vast enough. There are still uninhabited countries where one could settle millions of European, poor Jews who may perhaps become happy there and one day constitute a nation. That would perhaps be the best, the most rational solution to the European, Jewish question. But in the name of God, let Palestine be left in peace. Quoted in Baker 2007, 28, 29, 25. Around the same time, important developments in Arab opposition to Zionism centered on Zionist land purchasing activities in Palestine. Against the background of Arab, Palestinian, Syrian, Lebanese and Iraqi desire for autonomy, equal citizenship, decentralization and political reforms, not complete independence or sovereignty, within the Ottoman state, the sale of land to, and settle colonization by, European Zionists in Palestine was seen as a real threat to the indigenous people. The international Zionist movement and Zionist settlers in Palestine, in sharp contrast to the then German Templar settlers, made it clear that their ultimate objective was the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. According to Charles Smith, 1996, 34, in 1897, an Arab commission was formed in Jerusalem, headed by the Mufti, to examine the issue of land sales to Jews, and its protests led to the cessation of such sales for several years. In reality, however, land sales in Palestine never ceased. Zionist land purchasing activities in the Israeli Plain and Eastern Galilee continued and centered on some of their most fertile land in the country. These activities included the sale of lands of the Arab village of Al-Fular in the Nazareth sub-district to the Jewish National Fund in 1910. The lands of Al-Fular belonged to Elias Sersuk, a Greek Orthodox banker and absentee landlord from Beirut, who in 1910 reached a deal on their sale with the Zionists. According to Neville Mandel, this was some of the best agricultural land in Palestine, cited in Bracy 2011, 45. When the local Palestinian peasants refused to vacate their village and petitioned the Ottoman authorities, they were backed in their resistance by Shukri al-Asarli, 1878–1916, the Kaimarkam district governor of Nazareth in Galilee and later a deputy in the Ottoman Parliament, who became their key supporter in many of his articles in the Arabic press, including the newspaper Palestine. For al-Asarli, who wrote under a pseudonym, that of the legendary Salah al-Din who defeated the Latin Crusaders in the Battle of Hattin 26 in eastern Galilee in 1187, the Galilee was integral to Palestine. Entitled Letter of Salah al-Din al-Ayyubi to their commander of the Ottoman expedition to Horan Sarmi Pasha al-Faraki, one of his 1910 articles pleaded with the Ottoman governor of Horan to stand up to Zionist plans in Palestine. I beg you to hurry and repel the Zionist threat from Palestine. whose soil is soaked with the blood of the Prophet's companions and with the blood of my armies, and for the retrieval of which I have sacrificed the lives of my brothers, my people and commanders. Point 27. The Al-Fulah affair became the subject of an intensive newspaper campaign which had a powerful impact on local Arab public opinion. Baker 2016 b. 4. Echoing the political discourses, terminology and resistance literature, Adab al-Mukawarmah, of early Palestinian journalism, the geopolitical term Palestine, popularized initially by the newspaper Palestine, continued to be wedded to the Palestinian national recovery and nation-building in the post-Nakba period. The terminological continuities were evident in the Palestinian journalistic publications which paved the way for the emergence of the resistance movement in the late 1950s and founding of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, in the early 1960s. The first underground magazine of Fatah, Harakat ul-Tahrir al-Watani al-Filistini, Palestinian National Liberation Movement, which began to appear monthly in 1959 under the editorship of Khalil al-Wazir. 1935. 1988, a Palestinian refugee from Ul-Ramla, the old capital of Jund Palestine, was called Philistinuner, Nidar ul-Hayat, our Palestine, the call to life. Also, Palestine was the weekly supplement of the pro-Nasserist newspaper Al-Muhari, meaning the liberator or the editor, published in Beirut and edited by Ghassan Kanafarni. 1936-1972, a Palestinian refugee from Acre, a journalist, novelist and later a leading member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, Rabbani 2005. 275. Historic continuities and colonial transformation, Palestine as a single official administrative and territorial entity under the British, 1918 May 1948. Jerusalem was occupied by British forces in December 1917. The League of Nations formally awarded Britain a mandate over Palestine in 1922. Under the British, Palestine was once again a distinct political and administrative entity for the first time in centuries. The sense of continuity between the ancient, medieval and modern political geography and naming traditions of Palestine eventually came into play in the designation of the British Mandatory Government of Palestine, 1918-1948. This official designation of the country as Palestine was universally accepted by the League of Nations, which came into existence in 1920. And by the United Nations, which was founded in 1945. Following the Palestine Exploration Fund, the British mandatory authorities after 1918 assumed that the Palestinian Arabs, Muslims, Christians and Arab Jews had also preserved knowledge of the ancient place names which could help identify archaeological sites. Furthermore, in the modern era, and especially during the British Mandate of Palestine, the term Palestinian was used to refer to all people residing in Palestine, regardless of religion or ethnicity, including those European Jewish settlers granted citizenship by the British mandatory authorities. Fully aware of the destabilizing effects of its pro-Zionist commitments and the need to maintain political stability in the country, in the 1920s the British mandatory authorities in Palestine sought to preserve some of the continuities of late Ottoman Palestine in the mandatory system. The British authorities decided not only to link the local name of the country, Palestine, to all the official institutions, units and documents produced by the British Mandatory Government of Palestine, 1918-1948, they also linked some of the institutions they had helped create in the 1920s with the administrative structure and districts of late Ottoman Palestine. These official Palestine institutions and documents included the Supreme Muslim Council in Palestine, Al-Majlis al-Islamic al-Ayala by Palestine. The SMC was established in 1923 with the support of the British mandatory authorities and with authority over all the Muslim waqfs and Sharia courts in Palestine. The composition of the SMC effectively linked the administrative districts of late 19th century Palestine with the administration of Muslim-majority mandatory Palestine. The SMC consisted of 5 members, a president and 4 members, two of whom were to represent the autonomous administrative Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem and the remaining two to represent the late Ottoman Sanjaks of Acre and Nablus. Palestine Archaeological Museum. Continuities of late Ottoman Palestine and Mandatory Palestine are also found in the creation and collections of the Palestine Archaeological Museum. In 1918, almost immediately after the occupation of Jerusalem, the British military governor Sir Ronald Storrs took the decision to establish the Palestine Archaeological Museum in Jerusalem. The cornerstone of the Palestine Archaeological Museum was laid on the 19th of June 1930. The museum opened in 1938 as a national, not biblical, museum and was modeled on modern European museums. The Palestine Archaeological Museum, renamed by Israel after 1967 as their Rockefeller Museum, contains historical artifacts, jewels and mosaics from the Neolithic through the Byzantine periods and through the medieval Islamic and modern periods. Together with ancient Neolithic artifacts, the museum has the remains of 8th century wooden beams from the Al-Aqsa Mosque and an elaborately carved lintel from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre from the time of the Latin Crusaders. The Neolithic, ancient, medieval and modern heritage of Palestine is all encapsulated in this museum. The Palestine Archaeological Museum absorbed the collections of the Ottoman Imperial Museum of Antiquities in Jerusalem, the first archaeological museum to be set up in late Ottoman Palestine, which was founded in 1890 and existed until 1930. The latter's collections continued first with the British Palestine Museum of Antiquities, 1921-1930, and then with the Palestine Archaeological Museum, that a 1910 handwritten Ottoman catalogue of the Imperial Museum of Antiquities in Jerusalem has survived in the library of the Rockefeller Museum, where it is called their pre-war catalogue of the Palestine Archaeological Museum, St. Laurent with Tasco Mall 2013, 2223. Palestine Passport, Palestine Currency and Palestine Stamps. The British Mandatory Government of Palestine, with its administrative capital in Jerusalem, produced Palestine passports, Palestine currency and Palestine stamps. The stamps were in 3 languages, with the imprint Palestine, showcasing images of ancient and medieval Palestinian holy sites such as the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem and the Nativity Church in Bethlehem. Interestingly, in 1970 the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, headed by Yasser Arafat, issued a commemorative stamp on the 5th anniversary of its foundation, which also reproduced the British mandatory stamps with their imprints in Arabic, English and Hebrew. The Palestine Pound and the Palestine Currency Board. The British Mandatory Government of Palestine also issued the Palestine Pound, Arabic, Junior Philistini, Hebrew, equal in value to the pound sterling. It was the currency of the British Mandate in Palestine from 1927 to the 14th of May 1948. The currency of the State of Israel between the 15th of May 1948 and August 1948 and between 1948 and 1952 the Palestine Pound continued to be legal tender in Israel. The Palestine Pound was also the currency of Transjordan until 1949 and remained in usage in the West Bank until 1950. In the Gaza Strip the Palestine Pound circulated until April 1951, when it was replaced by the Egyptian pound. The Palestine Police Force, set up as a colonial police service established in Palestine 1920 and operated until 1948. The Palestine Railways, a government-owned railway company that ran all public railways in Palestine from 1920 until 1948. The Palestinian Citizenship Order in Council, a law of mandatory Palestine governing citizenship in the country. It came into effect on the 1st August 1925. The Arab Palestine Sport Federation, Ul-Ittihad ul-Riyadi Arabi ul-Philistini, a government body operating between 1931 and 1937 and between 1944 and 1948. It organized a variety of sports activities, including football, boxing and weightlifting. Khalidi, 2006, 2014. The Palestine Broadcasting Service, it began radio transmissions from the new transmitter in Ramallah, with offices in Jerusalem. Staff were recruited for 5 hours of daily broadcasts in 3 languages, English, Arabic and Hebrew, and training was given by the BBC. In 1942, the transmissions were split into 2 stations, 4 English and Arabic, Radio Al-Quds, and English Hebrew, Kol Yerushalayim. The Palestine Citrus Marketing Board, set up by the Mandatory Government of Palestine to regulate all citrus exports from Palestine. In October 1956, a group of former Palestinian citrus farmers, who had become refugees in the West Bank in 1948, sued Barclays Bank in a Jordanian court in Jerusalem for £1 million. The amount represented the total value of the citrus crop exported collectively by this group in 1947. Palestine Airways, founded by Pinhas Rutenberg in Mandatory Palestine in the mid-1930s, operated under the aegis of British Imperial Airways from 1937 until 1940, until it was taken over by the British Royal Air Force as part of the British war effort. Self-determination and the proliferation of Palestinian nationalist organizations, the Palestinian national movement during the mandatory period. As we have already seen above, Palestinian national consciousness did not emerge out of the blue in the early 20th century. It emerged gradually across decades and through momentous developments which affected Palestine and the wider region in the second half of the 19th century. However, the overall goals of Palestinian nationalism in the post-First World War period shifted radically from autonomy and equal citizenship under the Ottomans to anti-colonial struggle, liberation and independence during the British Mandatory period. Point 28. Crucially, active resistance to the existential threat posed by Zionist immigration to unsettle the colonialism of Palestine during the Mandatory period became central to the Palestinian nationalist struggle. The context of post-First World War Palestine had changed radically. The British, who occupied Palestine in 1917-1918, had committed themselves to Zionist settler goals as framed in the Balfour Declaration of November 1917. In 1920, the San Remo Conference of the four principal Allied powers of the First World War decided to include the words of the Balfour Declaration in the text of the British Mandate over Palestine. In coming face to face with the existential threat of the pro-Zionist Balfour Declaration's commitments, the Palestinian nationalist movement, early on, had to grapple with what was to become a perennial dilemma: whether to emphasize the territorial Palestinian or pan-Arabist dimensions of Palestinian Arab identity. This dilemma bedeviled Palestinian nationalist politics throughout the first half of the 20th century and was carried forward well into the post-Nakba period. In the post-First World War period, Palestinian nationalist resistance organizations began to proliferate. The Palestinian Revival Society, Al-Nardar al-Filistiniya, a Palestinian nationalist organization, was founded in Damascus in March 1919. Its first president was Salim al-Taibi, who went from Jerusalem to Damascus in the anticipation of the formation of Emir Faisal's administration in the city. Al-Taibi had been a senior officer in the Arab army of Emir Faisal, and his father was the Mufti of Tulkarem. He was later replaced as a president of the society by Salman Abd al-Rahman, the son of the mayor of Tulkarem. October 2007, 95. Other leaders of the society were Mohammed Izzat Darwaza from Nablus, Abd al-Qadir al-Muzaffar and Rushdie al-Shawar from Gaza. Al-Shawar traveled frequently between Damascus, Jerusalem, Jaffa and Gaza, accompanying al-Muzaffar on his trips to Palestine, smuggling arms and encouraging an uprising against the British. In 1919, it was reported he took 100 pistols from Damascus to Jerusalem for the members of Al-Fidayr. October 2007, 94. Also in the early days of the mandatory period, the Palestinian Arab National Leadership convened the Palestine Arab Congress, Al-Mu'tamar al-Arabi al-Filistini, a series of national congresses organized by a nationwide network of committees and local Palestinian Muslim and Christian associations. Between 1919 and 1928, 7 congresses were held in Jerusalem, Haifa, Jaffa and Nablus. Porak 1974. From 1920 until 1934, the National Executive Committee of the Congress, which coordinated Palestinian opposition to the Balfour Declaration and British pro-Zionist policies in Palestine, was headed by Musa Kazem al-Husseini, mayor of Jerusalem between 1918 and 1920. The Executive Committee and its local committees commanded widespread public support, but they were never officially recognized by the British authorities. The resolutions of the Third Palestine Arab Congress held in Haifa on 14 December 1920, which were subsequently presented to British Colonial Secretary Winston Churchill in early 1921, were summarized by Elon Papp as follows. The slogan of the conference was "Equality with the Mandate of Iraq." The text of Iraq's mandate stipulated that it would have a parliament elected on the democratic principle of one citizen, one vote. It acknowledged Iraq as a Watani, national entity, that would eventually become independent. Sheikh Suleiman Al-Tarji Al-Faraki explained to those gathered that these were the most elementary demands, yet they had been denied to the Palestinians because of the Balfour Declaration. Papp 2010, 208. This Third Palestine Arab Congress can be seen as the conceptive venue of the Palestine Arab National Movement, meeting in Haifa in mid-December 1920. Called on the new British rulers to establish a government to be chosen by the Arabic-speaking people who had lived in Palestine before the beginning of the World War. It completely, flatly rejected Zionist, Jewish claims to Palestine. Morris 2009, 88. Continuities in modern Palestinian national thinking can be seen in some of the institutionalized aspects of the Palestinian national struggle in the pre-Nakba period which re-emerged in the post-Nakba era. For instance, in 1930, following the 1929 Ul-Burak uprising Habat ul-Burak, in Muslim-majority Palestine, the Palestinian leadership set up the Palestine Arab National Fund (PANF), established by the Palestine Arab Executive and led by Fouad Saber, a Palestinian activist and accountant born in Acre. The PANF took some practical financial steps to discourage land sales to Zionist national institutions in Palestine. The PANF was the antecedent to the much larger and more multipurpose Palestine National Fund (PNF), set up by the PLO in 1964, see below. Understandably, during the mandatory, colonial period, some leading Palestinian personalities continued to view Palestinian identity as part of wider Arab identity of the Ul-Sham region and or Pan-Arab identities. But Pan-Arab or Ul-Sham identities as a whole cannot be understood in isolation from their constituent and particular Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian and Jordanian identities. Furthermore, Pan-Arab or Ul-Sham ideologies cannot negate the existence of historic Palestine or the deeply rooted, distinct and particular Palestinian identity. The short-lived newspaper Surya al-Janabiyyah, 1919-1920. Palestinian nationalism since 1918 has focused largely on the boundaries of mandatory Palestine. However, the emergence of modern nationalism in the Arab East in the late 19th century spawned the creation of new ideas and several myths, including that of Syrian Qawmi identity and the idea of Surya al-Janabiyyah, or Southern Syria, as a way of describing a particular modern Palestinian identity which began to emerge in the late Ottoman period. However, although the name Syria is as ancient as the name Palestine, and the modern term Syria should not be conflated automatically with the traditional Islamic term of Ul-Sham, there is no evidence that a Syrian Qawmi identity or a distinct Surya al-Janabiyyah identity had existed or been used by Palestinians before the late 19th century. At the same time, the rise of modern nationalism in the Arab world has, in fact, resulted the creation of a two-tier Watani Qawmi nationalism in the Arab East with two distinct and mutually complementary terms, Wataniyya and Qawmiyya, the former referring to country-based territorial nationalism, for instance, Palestine, and the latter to the wider Pan-Arab solidarity and unity schemes. This wider context had direct implications for Palestine, and in the post-Ottoman period Palestinian nationalists sought to promote a dyadic form of secular nationalism which combined a Palestine-based Wataniyya, local patriotic nationalism, with Qawmiyya Arabiyya, a form of Pan-Arab solidarity. Some Palestinian intellectuals also experimented for a short period after the First World War with Syrian Qawmi nationalism, but this political ideology is today largely extinct. The short-lived Palestinian newspaper Surya al-Janabiyyah was a case in point. Further, the invention of new terms, such as Surya al-Janabiyyah, often reflect multiple factors and the creation of the name of the newspaper. Surya al-Janabiyyah's Southern Syria is a classic case in point. The term Surya al-Janabiyyah reflected the convergence of four political and cultural currents: A. The Arab cultural and linguistic dimensions of modern Palestinian identity which were always strong. B. The invention and propagation of a late 19th century Syrian nationalist ideology. C. The anti-colonial nature of the modern Palestinian national struggle, a struggle shared with neighboring Arab peoples. And D. The particular circumstances surrounding the hurried formation of the pan-Arab nationalist regime in Damascus in 1919-1920 headed by Emir Faisal. Both the term Suriyya ul-Janubiyya and Faisal's administration in Damascus were short-lived. Syrian nationalism, like Palestinian nationalism and Arab nationalism, is a modern ideology, and Syria, as a national, territorially based idea, was invented in the late 19th century by Arab writers such as Boutros al-Bustani, 1819–1883, a Lebanese Maronite convert to Protestantism and a key figure in the Arab cultural awakening of his age. He was considered the intellectual founder of Syrian Qawmi nationhood, Shi'i 2011. The label Suriyya ul-Janubiyya was a short-lived politically driven construct manufactured in the early 20th century as a byproduct of the emergence of the Syrian nationalist, Qawmi, ideology of the period. Al-Bustani and some Arab figures in the Arab Renaissance of the late 19th century propagated the idea of a Greater Syria, partly in response to the bloody 1860 Druze Maronite civil war of Mount Lebanon, which spread to Damascus and other Syrian and Lebanese cities with devastating consequences. The Palestinian Arab newspaper Suriyya ul-Janubiyya, founded in Jerusalem in September 1919, does not testify to the weakness of the idea of Palestine after the First World War, but rather points to the strength and close relations that had existed under Islam for centuries between Palestine and Ul-Sham. More specifically, this episode should be seen within the context of the political activities of the short-lived regime of Emir Faisal in Damascus in 1919–1920. The newspaper only operated for a few months until its final closure by the British in April 1920. Shortly before Faisal's regime was removed by the French military. The newspaper was an organ of the Ul-Nadi ul-Arabi, the Arab Club, founded in Damascus in 1919, and supported Palestinian-Syrian unity under Emir Faisal's leadership in Damascus. It was published by a Palestinian lawyer, Mohammed Hassan al-Budairi, and edited by Arif ul-Arif with contributions from, inter alia, Hajj Amin ul-Husseini. Although the term Suriyya ul-Janubiyya has almost vanished from Arab and collective consciousness or discourse, it is occasionally resurrected by pan-Arab intellectuals as a way of denying the existence of the Palestinian people. Point 29. The term Suriyya ul-Janubiyya itself was propagated during and in the aftermath of this brief episode, but it was largely the outcome of the circumstances surrounding the formation of the short-lived pan-Arab administration of Faisal in Damascus and the concurrent debate about joint Palestinian-Syrian statehood. However, this episode also spawned a certain amount of literature on southern Syria and a great deal of confusion among historians, especially those who failed to understand the context and contingencies surrounding this new term. Some historians added more confusion by beginning to conflate a new label, Suriyya ul-Janubiyya, with Ul-Sham, an old term associated with the Islamic history of the wider Levant. Other historians also began to translate Ul-Sham automatically into Greater Syria, thus adding more confusion and little understanding as to the origin of the term Suriyya ul-Janubiyya. Yet, in contrast to Ul-Sham, Suriyya ul-Janubiyya was neither rooted in the history of Palestine nor found among Palestinians before the First World War. Also, crucially, the setting up of a newspaper under the name Suriyya ul-Janubiyya for several months in Jerusalem is not in itself evidence that the term Southern Syria encapsulated the whole spirit of the age or the lack of a Palestinian national identity in 1919. On the contrary, from the 1920s onwards, both Hajj Amin ul-Husseini and Arif ul-Arif emerged as highly influential figures in Palestinian nationalism, and the term Suriyya ul-Janubiyya was not used by either of them after Faisal's fall in 1920. Pan-Syrianism was a relatively short-lived ideological phenomenon. Moreover, during its brief existence, the newspaper Suriyya ul-Janubiyya advocated Palestinian-Syrian Arab unity schemes with a strong commitment to Palestinian nationalism and strong opposition to Zionist settler colonization. At the time, these political positions were perceived to be complementary rather than contradictory. However, with the overthrow of Faisal's administration in Damascus by the French in 1920, the idea of Surya ul-Janabiyyah declined sharply, and in the 1930s Palestinian political parties often combined strong commitments to Palestinian nationalism with pan-Arab rather than pan-Syrian unity schemes. One influential current of Palestinian nationalism continued to advocate Palestinian Wataniya, Palestine-based patriotic nationalism, closely allied with ideologies of pan-Arab Qawmiyyah, persisted throughout the British mandatory period. This current strongly argued against the British pro-Zionist policy of detaching Palestine from its Arab history and environment. Well-known representatives of this current were leaders of the Istiqlal Party, Arni Abd al-Hadi, 1889-1970, 30, and Mohammad Izzat Darwaz, 1888-1984, who had been one of the leaders of the Palestinian Revival Society, Al-Nadr al-Filistiniya, a Palestinian nationalist organization founded in Damascus in 1919. Abd al-Hadi belonged to a landowning family in the Jenin, Nablus area, and Darwaza came from a middle-class family of merchants from Nablus that had long been involved in textiles and had extensive trade relationships with the Arab merchants of Damascus and Beirut. Dumani, 1995, 5961. Both Abd al-Hadi and Darwaza had been educated in the Ottoman period and had been personally involved in radical pan-Arab political activities during the pre-mandatory period. Abd al-Hadi had been educated in Beirut, Istanbul, and at the Sorbonne University in Paris, and Darwaza, a self-taught intellectual, Muslim, 1991, 178, had served in the local Ottoman administration as a clerk in the Department of Telegraphic and Postal Services in Nablus and later as Director of Postal Services in Beirut. In the early 1930s, the Istiqlal Party became the only mass-based pan-Arabist party, which began to mobilize Palestinian Arabs around an anti-Zionist and anti-imperialist program, Tamari, 2008. 6-7. Furthermore, both Abd al-Hadi and Darwaza continued to believe in Palestine's identity as a component of the Greater Syrian Ubayd al-Sham homeland, Tamari, 2008. 7. The Istiqlal Party sought independence for Palestine within Arab unity schemes, pan-Arab schemes, which at the time were conceived as a way of empowering the Palestinian national struggle and resisting Zionist settler colonization. In fact, the leaders of the Istiqlal Party saw no contradiction between the advocacy of pan-Arabism and their active involvement in the Palestinian national liberation movement. On the contrary, for them the two objectives were complementary. Also, opposition to Zionist national claims to Palestine and opposition to the mandatory, colonial system in the Middle East, which was the main obstacle to Arab self-determination, were perceived as intertwined. If the British mandate fell, then the Zionist project would also collapse. Kramer, 2011, 256. Abd al-Hadi understood the close linkage at the time between local Palestinian identity, Arabism, and opposition to settler colonialism in Palestine. In his passionate quest to refute the Zionist claims to Palestine, Abd al-Hadi testified before the British Peel Commission in January 1937. While rejecting British policies which sought to detach Palestine from the rest of al-Sham in line with the commitments of the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which stated, His Majesty's government view would favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Abd al-Hadi was, at the same time, a Palestinian Arab nationalist and a key figure in, and one of the chief spokesmen of, the Palestinian Arab nationalist movement during the mandatory period. He served as secretary of the Executive Committee of the Palestine Arab Congress in 1928. He was also appointed General Secretary of the Arab Higher Committee, which was formed in April 1936 to coordinate the general strike among Palestinians. The Istiqlal Party took part in the Palestinian uprising in 1936, 1939 and called for an Indian Congress party-style boycott of the British. Khalidi, R. 2001, 25. The Istiqlal Party was subsequently banned by the British. As a shrewd countermove to the pan-Arabist orientation of the Istiqlal Party, Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem and head of the Supreme Muslim Council, and his supporters formed the Palestinian Arab Party, Al-Hizb al-Arabi al-Filistini, which included key Palestinian Muslim and Christian leaders. Kramer, 2011, 258. This party, which emphasized the Palestinian agency in and Palestinian dimensions of the national struggle in Palestine and dominated the Arab Higher Committee in the period 1936-1948, would subsequently inspire the emergence of the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, Harakat ul-Tahrir ul-Watani ul-Filistini or Fatah, in the post-Nakba period. The Palestinian Arab Collective Agency and Palestinian Arab national dimensions of the struggle in Palestine were also emphasized by another party created in the 1930s, the Palestine Arab Reform Party, Hizb ul-Islah ul-Arabi ul-Falastin, established by members of the Khalidi family of Jerusalem in June 1935, Kramer 2011. 258. The Palestinian uprising of 1936-1939 had a major impact on the consolidation of the particular components of Palestine's national identity and national struggle in Palestine. This can be best illustrated and symbolized by the nationalist poem Mortini, My Homeland, perhaps the most famous and influential Palestinian poem of all time. It was written by Ibrahim Choukan, 1905–1941, in 1934 and became a rallying cry against British colonialism and Zionism in Palestine during the Great Uprising in the 1930s, Juc and Tingali 1977. Choukan belonged to a notable Nablus family that had, under the Ottomans, dominated the politics of the city for much of the 18th and 19th centuries. He had been educated in Nablus, Jerusalem and at the American University of Beirut from 1923 to 1929. He later worked as a professor at the American University in Beirut and a sub-director of the Jerusalem-based Palestine Broadcasting Service. An excerpt from the poem, which has since then embodied that indomitable Palestinian national struggle for self-determination, reads as follows. The sword and the pen not talking or quarreling are our symbols, our glory and covenant, and a duty to fulfill it shake us. Our honor is an honorable cause, a raised flag, oh, your beauty in your eminence victorious over your enemies. My homeland, my homeland. From Palestine to the land of Israel, the Palestine Communist Party, Palestinische Kommunistische Party. The Israeli Communist Party began as an exclusively Jewish Ashkenazi party in Palestine in 1923, with Yiddish being the historical and literally their mother language Mainloshen of the Ashkenazi Jews and being a language spoken by many East European Jews. The Communist Party was called in Yiddish Palestinische Kommunistische Party. With their new Hebrew being in ascendancy, the party became eventually known in Israel by its Hebrew name, Har Miflager Har Kommunistit Har Israelit. In Mandatory Palestine, however, its Arabic name was the Palestine Communist Party, Ul-Hizb ul-Shuyui ul-Filistini. In 1923, the PCP was born as a coalition of left-wing Zionist settlers and non-Zionist communists among the East European Jewish immigrants to Palestine. At its foundation and in its early years, the party was predominantly Jewish and it remained small but overwhelmingly composed of East European Jews during much of Mandatory Palestine. Eunice 2000, 117. Dominated by Stalinists throughout much of the Mandatory period. In late 1947, following the Soviet Union's support for the UN partition resolution, the party embraced a Zionist designation for the country, Eretz Yisrael, instead of Palestine, and were instrumental in securing military assistance from Czechoslovakia for the State of Israel during the toughest stages of the 1948 war. 31. Also in 1948, the leader of the party, Meir Vilner, was a signatory to the Israeli Zionist Independence Charter, Megillat Ha'atzmaut, which repeatedly described the country as the land of Israel, Hebrew, Eretz Yisrael. In the post-Nakba period, the party promoted a collective memory which contributed to the Israelification of the Palestinian citizens of Israel, the so-called Israeli Arabs. At the same time, during this early Mandatory period, the Palestinian Arabs created a labor movement and set up the Palestine Arab Workers' Society, Jamiyat ul-Arabiyya ul-Filistiniya, the main Palestinian Arab labor organization, established in 1925 with headquarters in Haifa and branches in Nazareth, Jaffa and Maidal Ascalon. From 1937 to 1947, its general secretary was Sarmi Tahar, 1916 to 1947, born in Araba, a town near Jenin. His family later moved to Haifa, who was the main Palestinian Arab labor leader during the mandatory period. Lockman 1996, 259. He was assassinated in Haifa on the 12th of September 1947. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, the Palestine Jewish communists maintained close relations with the Palestine Arab Workers' Society. In the middle of the Second World War, in 1943, the Palestine Communist Party, under pressure to accommodate the Middle Eastern policies of Stalinist Russia, came into conflict with the key aims of the Palestinian national movement. The party split with the more radical anti-Zionist Palestinian Arab members, who formed the National Liberation League in 1944. Coming under Zionist left-wing influences and endorsing the Soviet notion that Zionism was a form of bourgeois nationalism, the PCP changed its name to Maiki, the Communist Party of Eretz Israel, the Communist Party of the Land of Israel, after endorsing the UN Partition Resolution of November 1947 embracing a term central to Zionist thinking. This was the first time the Palestine communists had used the Zionist term Eretz Israel, Land of Israel. Furthermore, the leader of Maiki, Meir Vilna Kovner, was one of the signatories of the Israeli Declaration of Independence of May 1948. A document whose Hebrew text does not mention the term Palestine and talks only about Eretz Israel. The document begins with rehashing some of the founding myths of Zionism. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance and gave to the world the eternal Book of Books. Point 32. Also, crucially, the party was involved in arms shipments from Czechoslovakia to the Zionist military organizations in 1948-1949, deliveries which radically altered the military balance on the ground in Palestine in 1948 and proved significant for the establishment of the Israeli state. Since 1948, the Jewish members of the party have also served in the Israeli army. Bedeviled by contradictory tendencies, after 1948 the party took part in Israeli parliamentary politics and became known as Maiki. After another internal split in 1965, the main parliamentary faction became known as Raker, an acronym for the New Communist List, Hebrew, Reshemer Kommunistit Hadasher. By this stage the party was a predominantly Palestinian Arab party within the Green Line, with representation in the Israeli Knesset, parliament. Historically, and in particular since 1948, the party's political platform largely focused on equality and civil rights for the Palestinians within Israel. Today the party is known as Hadash, a Hebrew acronym for Har Hazat Har Demokratit L'Shalom, Democratic Front for Peace and Equality, Arabic, Ol Jarber ad Demokratiyer li Salam wal Musawa, with a political platform committed to the two-state solution. Palestinian national institutions and organizations in the post-Nakba period. The revolutionary politics of the PLO. In the post-Nakba period, a large number of Palestinian anti-colonial organizations and secular institutions were established. Several of these revolutionary bodies predated and anticipated the founding of the PLO in 1964, and these included the Palestinian Student Union in Cairo, 1952, the General Union of Palestinian Students, 1959, the first group of Fatah, Palestinian National Liberation Movement, founded in 1959 around an organ called Philistinuner, or Palestine, the Palestinian Women's League, 1963, and the General Union of Palestinian Workers, 1963. The national bodies created in the post-Nakba period included All Palestine Government, Hukumat, Falastin, in Gaza on 1 October 1948. The Palestinian Student Union set up in Cairo in the early 1950s, led by Yasser Arafat. Fatah, Harakat ol Tahrir ol Watani ol Philistini, Palestinian National Liberation Movement, was founded in 1959. Its first underground magazine, which began to appear monthly in 1959 under the editorship of Khalil Olweiser, 1935-1988, a refugee from Ul Ramler, was called Philistinuner, Nidar ul Hayat, or Palestine, the Call to Life. The General Union of Palestinian Students, GUPS, established in Cairo in 1959, becoming part of the PLO in 1969. The Palestinian Women's League was established in Cairo in 1963, later in 1965 absorbed into the General Union of Palestinian Women. The General Union of Palestinian Workers, GUPW, was established in Hilwan in Egypt in 1963, becoming part of the newly created PLO in 1965. The first Palestinian National Council, PNC, met in East Jerusalem on the 2nd of June 1964 and formally founded the PLO. The PNC became the legislative body of the PLO. The Palestine Liberation Organization was established in June 1964. The Palestinian National Charter, Ul-Mithaq ul-Watani ul-Filistini, of the PLO was first adopted in June 1964. The Palestinian National Fund was set up 1964 and conformed to Article 24 of the PLO to finance the activities of the PLO. The PNF is responsible for managing financial aid coming from a variety of sources, funds from Arab states, contributions from wealthy Palestinians, and a liberation tax levied on Palestinians working in Arab countries. The Palestine Liberation Movement, Fatah, was established in 1965 and took over the PLO in 1968. The official organ of the PLO, Palestine al-Thahrir, Palestine of the Revolution, was set up in Beirut in 1972. The General Union of Palestinian Women was established in 1965 as part of the PLO and with the goal of organizing Palestinian women and promoting an active role for them in Palestinian social, economic and political spheres. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Ul-Jarber ul-Shawbiyar li-Tahrir Falastin, is a secular Palestinian socialist organization founded in 1967 by Dr. George Habash, 1926–2008, a Palestinian refugee from Lidr, Mandatory Palestine. It has been the second largest of the groups forming the PLO. The Union of Palestinian Women Committees was set up in 1980 to empower Palestinian women and to contribute to the Palestinian national struggle against the Israeli military occupation. Since 2001, the union has been licensed by the Palestinian Interior Ministry. The Palestinian National Authority was established following the Oslo Accords in 1993. Since then, it has internally governed a small part of their occupied Palestinian territories. The Palestinian Broadcasting Corporation, PBC, was established in July 1994 within the jurisdiction of the newly formed Palestinian National Authority. The PBC has a subsidiary radio station, The Voice of Palestine, and a satellite channel, Palestinian Satellite Channel. The Palestinian TV channel first began broadcasting in 1996 in Gaza, Jamal 2005. The Palestinian Department of Antiquities and Cultural Heritage was created by the Palestinian National Authority in 1994. Its longtime head, Palestinian archaeologist Dr. Hamdan Tahar, saw it as a revival of the Palestine Department of Antiquities, which was established in 1920 under the British mandate. Tahar 2010. The revolutionary politics of the PLO experienced sharp decline after the departure of the PLO from Lebanon in 1982. Since then, the PLO and its national institutions have become largely marginalized after the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993. And especially since the creation of the Palestinian National Authority in 1994. However, the historic legacy, revolutionary politics and symbolic value of the PLO as a Palestinian national liberation movement, based on popular representation and enjoying significant support among anti-colonial movements in the Third World, go far beyond its current weak and dysfunctional organizational structures and virtual political paralysis. Studia Palestina, Palestine Studies and the proliferation of modern research societies and institutions. In modern times, Palestine Studies as a scholarly discipline has grown phenomenally across several continents and has continued to expand in recent decades, although some of the recently founded centers focus largely on modern Palestine and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Furthermore, when referring to the ancient history of this region, modern European scholarship, and early Zionist scholarly societies such as the Jewish Palestine Exploration Society, founded in 1914, universally and unanimously talk about Palestine, even when referring to Jewish history. The opening of their Holy Land to Europe's political, cultural religious penetration in the 19th century resulted in mountains of publications on Palestine. To cite some of the scholarly societies, centers, projects, museums, journals relevant to Palestine studies and the ancient history and heritage of Palestine. The Palestine Exploration Fund, founded in London in the 1860s with a focus on ancient Palestine, it published the Palestine Exploration Quarterly. The Palestine Pilgrims Text Society, an organization established in 1884, the society operated for 11 years and published translations of medieval texts relevant to the history of pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Particular attention was given to accounts containing geographical or topographical information in a variety of languages, including Greek, Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, Old French, Russian and German. Its publications included Guy Lestrange's translation from Arabic and annotation of Al-Muqaddas's, Al-Maqdisi's, work under the title, Description of Syria, including Palestine by Muqaddasi, 1986, Nazir Khosrau's Diary of a Journey Through Syria and Palestine, 1888. Deutscher Verein für die Erforschung Palästinas, German Society for the Exploration of Palestine. The Society's annual publication was Zeitschrift des Deutschen Palästina-Vereins, Journal of the German Society for the Exploration of Palestine. The Deutscher Verein zur Erforschung Palästinas, German Association for the Study of Palestine, was established in 1877 at the initiative of the Swiss geographer Karl Zimmermann's Association for the Promotion of Bible Studies and Research on the History and Culture of Palestine. From 1877 it regularly published Zimmermann's Zeitschrift. Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society, Russian, was founded in 1882 as a scholarly and political organization for the study of Palestine. Following the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the society was renamed the Russian Palestine Society, Russian, and was attached to the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. Its original Russian name was restored in Zeitschrift des Deutschen Palästina-Vereins, Journal of the German Society for Exploration of Palestine, is the official bulletin of the German Protestant Institute of Archaeology in the Holy Land, Deutsches Evangelisches Institut für Altertumswissenschaften des Heiligen Lands, founded in 1900. It covers topics such as archaeology, topography, iconography, religion, social anthropology, philology and literature. Palestine Archaeological Museum, Al-Quds at Jerusalem, was initiated in 1918 and officially opened in 1938. It was renamed Rockefeller Museum by Israel after the 1967 occupation. Palestine Folklore Museum, Al-Quds at Jerusalem, was set up in Al-Qarleh in the 1930s. Jewish Palestine Exploration Society was founded in 1914 with a focus on ancient Palestine. It was renamed after 1948 as the Israel Exploration Society. The Journal of the Palestine Oriental Society was published in Jerusalem by the Palestine Oriental Society from 1920 to 1948 and focused on ancient history and antiquities. The Institute for Palestine Studies, founded in Beirut in 1963, publishes the Journal of Palestine Studies. Palestine Research Center was founded by the PLO in Beirut in 1965. It published a periodical entitled Palestinian Affairs, Shuyun Philistinier. Journal of Holy Land and Palestine Studies was founded in 2002. It is published by Edinburgh University Press. The European Centre for Palestine Studies, Exeter University, was established in 2009. Centre for Palestine Studies, Columbia University, New York. Centre for Palestine Studies, SOAS, London, was established in 2012. The Palestinian Museum opened in Birzeit in May 2016. Chapter 10.